All right, so today we are going to be taking a deep dive into Romans 12.121.
Yeah, it's a really rich section.
It is, and I'm really excited to kind of unearth all the wisdom that's in there because it really is timeless.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like even though it was written, thousands of years ago,
Uh,
it's so relevant to how we're supposed to live today as Christians.
I think that's one of the things that makes this passage so fascinating is that it really gets to the heart of what it means to live out our faith in a practical way.
Absolutely.
It's not just about lofty ideals, but about real world guidance.
Exactly. And so to do that, we have a pretty hefty stack of resources in front of us.
We do.
We have, of course, the biblical verses themselves, but we also have some study guides that break it down, commentaries that give us historical context, thematic analyses, all kinds of things to kind of help us make connections and, unpack all this.
I'm excited to jump in.
I am too. So let's start right at the beginning, Romans 12, verse 1.
Well,
It starts off really strong with this image of presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice.
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that it's a living sacrifice?
What do you think about that, right off the bat?
Well, I mean, it immediately makes me think about how it contrasts with the Old Testament idea of animal sacrifices, right? We're not talking about a one-time offering here. This is about something ongoing, something continuous.
It's like a complete surrender.
It is. It's a complete surrender to God's will.
Wow.
Your life, your actions, your thoughts, even your desires.
Yeah, it's like, okay, God,
Yeah.
I'm all in. Like everything I do is for you, is an offering to you.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, how it calls it our reasonable service.
Yeah.
It's not presented as this heavy, dreadful obligation.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually presented as a natural response, even like a joyful response that flows from God's mercy.
So it's more about a response to what he's done.
Mm.
Yeah, than me trying to earn brownie points or something like that.
Yeah, it's like we recognize what God has already done for us and we respond with gratitude.
Yeah, I like that. And that leads us kind of naturally into the next big thing, which is this idea of transformation.
Yeah, transformation is huge in Romans 12.
It is, right? Like verse 2, it tells us to be not conformed to this world, but instead to be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's what trips a lot of people up, because it's not enough to just say okay, I'm not going to do the things that the world does.
Right.
You actually have to change the way that you think.
You do. It's an inward transformation.
So how do we do that? What does that look like?
Well, I think it's an ongoing process.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it starts with really intentionally engaging with God's word,
Okay.
spending time in prayer, and honestly seeking to understand God's will.
Yeah, it's about aligning.
It is. It's about shifting our perspective to align with His.
And if we can shift our perspective, then making decisions that are also aligned with His will become easier.
Absolutely. And then we're actually, like the verse says, proving what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.
That's the goal.
It is. It's about letting our faith become this force that shapes every aspect of our lives.
It's not just a Sunday morning thing or even,
right, exactly.
A Wednesday night thing. It's
It's everything.
how you live.
It is.
It's everything.
Yeah. It impacts how we think, how we work, how we relate to others.
It's all encompassing.
It is.
Okay, I'm seeing how this is getting personal.
Yeah.
Romans 12 is it's not just some abstract principles. It's okay, here's how to actually live your life.
Absolutely.
Okay, and another big theme that pops up is this idea of unity and diversity.
Yeah.
And Romans 12.45 uses this really cool analogy of the body with many parts.
Yeah. I love that analogy.
Why do you like it?
Well, I just think it's such a vivid way to illustrate the concept, each part of the body is essential.
Right. Each part has a unique function, but they all have to work together.
They have to work together.
For the whole body to thrive. And that's a direct parallel to the Christian community,
Yeah, it's like everyone has something to contribute no matter what their background is, what their skills are, whatever. We all belong.
Right.
We're all needed.
We are.
And that's a really cool, encouraging thought. But then you get to Romans 12.3, and it throws in this, caution about pride and self-importance.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you think that's so important in this context?
Well, because I think it's so easy, when we start thinking about our own gifts and our own contributions, to fall into that trap of thinking we're more valuable than others or that our contributions are more significant.
Yeah.
But verse 3 really reminds us that even our faith itself
Oh, wow.
is a gift from God.
That's a good point.
We didn't earn it, so we should all come to the table with humility,
Yeah.
recognizing that we're all on level ground. I like that image of everybody on level ground.
Yeah.
Like we all have something to offer, but none of us is like better,
Right.
more special, more
Exactly.
gifted, than the other person.
We're all in this together.
Yeah. Okay, so then that brings us to spiritual gifts, which is
Yeah.
where Romans 12.6-8 takes us.
Okay.
And I don't know about you, but I always love reading this section because it just lists all these different gifts.
It does. It's a beautiful list, isn't it?
It is, and it just makes you think like, oh, wow, look at the variety. So it talks about prophecy and ministry and teaching, exhortation, giving, leadership, mercy. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah.
And it really emphasizes that we need to use these gifts with diligence and faithfulness.
That's key. Yeah.
And I think, to me, what's so important about this is that it reminds us that those gifts are not from us.
Right.
They are from God. And we're not supposed to be using them for self-promotion or personal gain.
No. They're meant to be used for the benefit of the community, to build up the body of Christ.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it really makes you think like, okay, what are my unique gifts?
Yeah.
And how am I using them to serve others?
Those are really important questions.
They are.
And maybe even a little bit uncomfortable,
Yeah.
Because they force us to take stock of our lives and ask if we're really living in a way that reflects God's purpose for us.
It's a good time to pause and really take a look at how we're living.
Self-reflection is always good.
Yeah, okay, so let's get personal here. Romans 12.9-13 really kind of zooms in on this idea of love.
Love, yeah.
It's this defining characteristic of being a Christian. And it doesn't just talk about love in some vague, sentimental way.
No.
It really gets specific.
It does.
About what this love looks like in action.
Absolutely. It talks about genuine affection, about honoring others above ourselves, being diligent in our work, serving the Lord with passion.
Yeah.
Persevering in prayer, being generous, showing hospitality. It really covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, so it sounds like this love that we're supposed to have as Christians, it permeates every aspect of our lives.
It does.
It's not just like, oh, I love my family. It's how I live my life is a reflection of that love.
Exactly.
Yeah, what do you think about that phrase, let love be without dissimulation?
To me, that's a call for authenticity.
Okay.
Our love can't be fake.
Right.
It can't be a show that we put on for others.
Yeah.
It has to come from a genuine place in our hearts.
That's a good point.
And that requires some serious self-reflection, right? Like, are we really loving others or are we just going through the motions?
Yeah, that's a tough question to ask yourself, but it's an important one.
It is.
Okay, now, I'm not going to lie.
Okay.
When I read Romans 12, one of the things that I always, really struggle with is the instruction in verse 14.
Yeah.
It says, bless them which persecute you.
It's a tough one.
It's so hard.
It is.
How on earth do you bless somebody who's actively trying to do you harm?
It feels impossible, doesn't it?
It does.
Especially in our world where, everyone tells you to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, fight back.
To fight back. Never let anyone walk all over you.
Right. You've got to be strong.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody take advantage of you.
Exactly. So this verse, it really goes against everything that our culture teaches us.
It really does.
Yeah.
But it's also a powerful reminder of, what Jesus did.
It is. It's such a beautiful picture.
He didn't retaliate when he was persecuted.
No. He responded with grace and compassion.
Yeah. And that's what we are called to do.
That's what we're called to do.
But it's so hard.
It is hard.
So how do we do that? How do we actually apply this principle?
Well, I think it's a daily struggle, you know?
Yeah.
It's a constant choice to surrender our hurt, our desire for revenge to God.
Yeah.
And to ask him to fill us with his love instead.
And sometimes that love, it doesn't always look pretty.
No, it doesn't.
Sometimes it looks like, tough love or, setting a boundary, but it's never rooted in bitterness.
Exactly.
It's never rooted in hatred or I'm going to get you back.
Right. It's always rooted in love.
It's coming from a place of love. Yeah. So it's not about being a doormat.
No.
But it's about responding in a way that reflects God's character.
Yeah.
Even when it's really hard.
Absolutely.
Okay. Another verse that I think is really relevant to how we live today is Romans 12.18.
Mm-hmm.
It says to live peaceably with all men.
Yeah.
That sounds like an
It sounds impossible, doesn't it?
Especially in today's world where it feels like everybody's at odds with everybody else.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
I think it starts with humility.
Okay.
Recognizing that we don't have all the answers. Right. And that we're not always right. It means being willing to listen to others, to really try to understand their perspectives, even when we disagree with them.
It sounds like patience and self-control
It does.
are like key components of this.
They are.
It's not going to be easy.
No, it's not. It's not always going to be easy.
Yeah. But if we want to be peacemakers, if we want to reflect God's love in this world, it's something we have to strive for.
We do. And remember, it starts within the Christian community.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
We have to model unity and harmony.
Yeah.
Even when we have differences of opinion.
Right, we have to practice what we preach.
Exactly.
Like if we're out in the world telling people to love each other and get along and we can't even do that ourselves,
right.
It's not going to be very effective.
It's not. It's not.
So, yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us into the final verses of Romans 12, verses 19 to 21, where we get this incredible instruction to overcome evil with good.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really tough.
It does,
it's like taking everything that we've been talking about and putting it into practice in the most difficult of situations.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we actually, resist that urge to retaliate?
Right.
And instead respond with kindness and compassion?
Yeah.
Especially when someone has really hurt us.
It's a challenge, that's for sure.
It is.
It's interesting, as we go further into Romans 12, you realize this passage isn't just about our own personal transformation. It's also about how that transformation impacts the community.
Right. Yeah.
We've already talked about unity and diversity and the spiritual gifts.
Yeah.
Even the idea of being peacemakers, and all of that really affects how we interact with the people around us.
Absolutely. And it's as we move into Romans 12.1-18, it almost feels like the focus shifts even more intentionally towards our relationships.
Yeah, I think you're right.
With others, both inside the church and outside the church. So, okay, Romans 12.16 says, "Be of the same mind, one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits." Wow, there's a lot packed into that one verse.
There is.
What jumps out to you the most from that?
Well, first of all, it's clearly a call for humility.
Okay.
Especially within the Christian community.
Right.
We're not supposed to be puffed up with pride, thinking we're better than others,
Right.
Instead, we're supposed to be like-minded, value each other, and avoid arrogance.
It's like that saying, humility is not thinking less of yourself.
Yes.
It's thinking of yourself less.
Exactly.
It's about shifting that focus
It is.
away from ourselves.
Yeah.
And onto the needs of other people.
Exactly. And notice how it also says, condescend to men of low estate.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people get tripped up on that word condescend.
Yeah.
Because we think of it in a negative way.
Right, like looking down on someone. Yeah. But I don't think that's what Paul is getting at here.
Right.
I think what he's saying is that we should intentionally reach out to those who are different from us.
Okay.
Those who maybe have less than us.
Yeah.
And we should treat them with dignity and respect.
So it's about building bridges.
Yeah.
And making people feel like they belong.
It is. It's about fostering a sense of belonging within the community, regardless of their social status or their background or anything like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And then it also says, be not wise in your own conceits, which is another way of saying none of us have all the answers.
Right.
We should be open to learning from others, even those that we might consider lesser than us in some way.
Yeah, be teachable.
Be teachable.
Because everybody has something to offer.
Absolutely.
And I think this kind of ties in nicely with Romans 12.1c, which says, recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men.
Yeah, that's a powerful one. It is. It's okay, when somebody wrongs you, don't try to get them back.
Right.
Don't seek revenge.
Right.
Don't try to get even.
Focus on doing what's right.
Yeah.
Focus on being honorable, even when it's hard.
Even when your emotions are screaming at you.
Yeah.
To get back at that person.
Exactly. It's about choosing the higher road.
Yeah.
And it's about breaking that cycle of negativity and instead choosing to respond with integrity and grace.
I also love how it says, provide things honest in the sight of all men.
Yes.
Because it's not just about what we do when nobody's looking.
Right.
It's about our actions.
Yeah.
Being consistent.
Consistent with our words.
With our words.
Yeah.
We can't be talking about love and forgiveness.
Right.
If we're harboring all this bitterness and
No.
resentment in our hearts.
It's about living authentically,
Yeah.
transparently, so that our lives really do reflect the truth of the gospel.
It's got to be real.
It does.
Yeah. Okay. And then that brings us to Romans 12.1t, which is kind of like the culmination of this whole section.
It is. It's a great summary verse.
It is. It says, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men.
Yeah.
And that to me really emphasizes that we are called to be peacemakers. Like we're supposed to actively pursue harmony.
Yes.
In our relationships.
Yeah.
Both in the church and in the world.
And it recognizes that sometimes, despite our best efforts, it might not be possible to live peaceably with every single person.
Right. Some people are just difficult.
Yeah. But it challenges us to do everything in our power to make it happen.
So it's not about being passive or avoiding conflict.
No, not at all.
It's about approaching conflict in a way that, like, desires reconciliation and restoration.
Exactly. And that's where, humility comes in, respect for the other person.
Yeah.
Understanding, really trying to listen, to empathize, to find some common ground, even when you have differences.
And it's about recognizing that the other person, even if they've wronged you, even if they've hurt you, is still a human being.
They are made in the image of God.
Right, in the image of God.
Yes.
And we're all
on this journey together.
We are. And, we all mess up.
We do.
We all need grace.
We do.
And so
that's a good point.
Yeah, so we gotta extend that to other people.
Absolutely.
Especially when it's hard.
It's not easy.
It's not, but it's what we're called to do.
It is.
And it's what, Jesus did for us.
It is.
So I think it's definitely a good reminder.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so as we're talking about all this, peacemaking and reconciliation, it's kind of hard to ignore the reality of the fact that sometimes we're going to face persecution and suffering.
Yeah, and we touched on this earlier with Romans 12.14, that whole bless them which persecute you. But I think it's something that deserves a little bit more attention.
It does, because it's so counterintuitive.
It is.
Especially in our world.
Especially today.
That says, fight back, stand up for yourself.
Right.
Don't let everybody...
Don't let anyone walk all over you.
Take advantage of you.
Right.
Demand justice.
Yeah.
So this is like the opposite of all of that.
It is.
And so I'm wondering, how do we even wrap our minds around that?
Well, I think it requires a really radical shift in perspective.
Okay.
It requires us to see our persecutors through the lens of God's love and compassion.
So it's about remembering that they are also broken people.
Yes.
Hurting people who need grace.
Who need grace, who need redemption, just like we do.
Yeah. And it's about choosing to forgive.
It is.
Even when it feels impossible. And trusting that God
will ultimately bring justice.
Yeah. He will.
Yeah.
He sees the whole picture.
He does.
And so we have to trust that he will, handle things the way that they need to be handled.
Yeah, and I think sometimes blessing our persecutors might look like praying for them.
Okay.
Showing them kindness, maybe even speaking up for them.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah, yeah.
It might mean, refusing to participate in gossip or slander.
Right.
Even when we're tempted to retaliate with our words.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not easy.
It's not.
But it's a powerful
example
of how Romans 12 calls us to live differently. It's like we're really supposed to embody the love and grace of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Even when it's really hard.
Even in the face of adversity.
Yeah. And it makes me think of that verse in Romans 5.8.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
That says, but God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us.
Oh, that's a perfect illustration.
It is, because it's like God loved us when we were his enemies.
Yes.
When we were actively rebelling against him.
He still chose to love us.
And he still chose to die for us.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of love that we're supposed to show to other people.
That's the moment.
Even the people who are persecuting us.
It's a supernatural love,
Yeah.
It's a love that goes beyond our human capacity.
It does.
It flows from the very heart of God.
And it has the power to change.
It does.
Hearts and minds. And to change the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing to think about, the power of that kind of love.
It is.
It's not something we can just conjure up on our own.
No, not at all.
It really has to be a gift from God, flowing through us.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to the final section of Romans 12,
Okay.
verses 19-21,
All right.
where we see this really incredible call to overcome evil with good.
Yeah, it's kind of like the climax
It
of
is.
the whole thing.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
we've talked about all these things, renewing our minds, living sacrificially, pursuing unity, being peacemakers.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, here's how you put it all into practice.
Right. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So verse 19 says, "Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but that's a really hard
That is.
verse for me to swallow sometimes,
Yeah.
especially when I feel like I've been wronged or hurt.
It's hard to let go of that desire for revenge.
It is, but what's the wisdom in that? Like, why should we hand over
Yeah.
that desire to God?
Well, I think it's about recognizing that God is the ultimate judge.
Okay.
He sees the whole picture. He knows everybody's motives. And he will bring about true justice in his time.
Right.
When we try to take matters into our own hands,
Yeah.
we not only disrupt his plan,
Right.
but we also risk becoming consumed by bitterness
Yeah.
and resentment,
It's like we're saying, God, I trust you.
It's an act of surrender and
Yeah.
faith. And it opens up the possibility for healing and restoration, both for ourselves and for those who have wronged us.
Okay. And then we get to verse 20,
Right.
which is probably one of the most well-known verses
Yes.
in this whole passage.
It is, and often misinterpreted, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It says, "Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head."
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that a lot of people take that to mean, like, you're going to make the other person feel really guilty.
Right.
Or like you're trying to, get back at them in some way.
Yeah, it's definitely not about revenge or trying to inflict pain on somebody.
Yeah.
It's actually about the transformative power of kindness.
Okay.
When we respond to hostility with genuine acts of love and compassion, it can really have a disarming effect.
Right.
It can melt away that anger,
Yeah.
resentment, and it can create space for repentance and reconciliation.
It's almost like we're trying to, cool things down.
Cool things down, yeah.
Like we're throwing water on the fire, not gasoline.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I love how it says, like meet their basic needs.
Yeah.
If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink.
Mm-hmm.
Like show them care and concern even when they don't deserve it.
Even when it feels like the opposite of what they deserve.
Right.
Yeah, it's a radical act of love.
It is.
That goes against our natural instincts.
Yeah, our flesh wants to,
Right, it wants to fight back. It wants to retaliate.
Yeah.
But that just perpetuates that cycle of hurt and brokenness.
Absolutely. So it takes a lot of humility.
It does.
And strength of character to choose to do that.
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's not, but I think when we do,
Yeah.
we're really tapping into a power that's bigger than ourselves.
It's the power of God's Spirit working in us and through us.
Yeah, and we're reflecting his character.
Exactly.
Which is, slow to anger, abounding in love, merciful and compassionate.
Yeah, and that brings us to the final verse of this passage.
Okay.
Verse 21, which I see as like a call to action.
Oh, okay.
Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good.
So simple.
It's so simple.
So powerful.
It is. It's profound.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that, we're not in this battle alone. We have the power of God's Spirit with us.
Yeah.
And he's given us everything we need to stand firm against evil and be agents of his love and grace in the world.
So we don't have to let evil win.
We don't. We have a choice.
We have a choice.
Yeah.
And we can choose to overcome evil with good.
Absolutely. And it's a choice we have to make every day.
Every day, yeah.
In big ways and small ways.
Yeah, it's not easy.
No, it's not.
But it's so worth it.
It is. It's the only way to truly break the cycle of evil and bring about lasting peace.
And, as we're talking about all this, I'm amazed by how this passage is not just like a set of rules or guidelines. It's really a picture of what it means to be truly transformed by the gospel. Like it's letting the love of Christ flow through us in such a way that it changes not only our own lives, but the lives of the people around us.
It's contagious,
It is. Yeah, it's contagious.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Romans 12,
Yeah.
what are you feeling like? What are some key takeaways for you?
Well, I'm so struck by the depth and the relevance of these verses, like
Right.
they really challenge us to think differently,
Yeah.
to love deeper, and to live in a way that truly reflects the radical grace and truth of the gospel.
It's challenging.
It is challenging, but it's so exciting too.
It is, because it's like, okay, this is how we can make a difference.
Yeah, this is how we can change the world.
Yeah. I hope our listeners are leaving today feeling not only inspired, but also equipped
Yes.
to actually put these principles into practice.
That's the goal.
Because it's one thing to talk about it.
Right.
It's another thing to actually do it.
Absolutely.
It's not easy.
It's not, but it's a journey worth taking.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Romans 12.121.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope it sparked a desire in you to keep, digging deeper into God's word and to keep growing in your faith.
Keep diving deep.
Until next time, keep diving deep.